welcome to everyone for joining us. As I had put in the chat session earlier, we've got about 70 people registered. We'll see if everyone shows up for that. It's really exciting to see so many people involved and interested in this particular series. And looking at all the folks that have registered, it seems like we have a good number of people in terms of folks associated with Slow Food Columbus and those associated with Ohio State. And so let's see, we're going to begin today's talk on equity. Again, this is a three-part series on equity, inclusion, and justice for those who had joined us in the spring. You know that we had talked about good, clean, and fair, and asking those questions about what do those terms mean to each of us and to those who are presenting. Today, we're really fortunate to have Julialynne Walker, from the manager firm, the Bronzeville Growers Market, Ron Jordan, who's the CEO of Jordan Hospitality Group, and Whitney Gherman, an educator at Ohio State Marion Extension, with us. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce Lee Oldershaw, who's the the extraordinaire when it comes to APOP, and have her talk to us about what APOP is and how you could potentially get involved.
Cool. Can you hear me? Has it worked?
Yep, we can hear the crickets and everything.
Yeah, so I want to, before I get started with any sort of introduction to APOP, I want to say tremendous thank you to everybody who's watching, who's joining us. Huge thank you to our speakers today, and also to Mark Anthony. He makes these things incredible, so thank you so much for doing that. So APOP, as you might imagine, it's the Anthropology Public Outreach Program, so we pretty much focus on anything that's about humans. Anything that, has to do with our history or our past, anything that has to do with our present, our culture, our biology, literally anything about humans, we're covering it. So APOP is an outreach program that was put together at The Ohio State University. In the anthropology department, it is fully run by volunteers, so everybody you see associated with us, it's all going to be undergrads, graduate students, and faculty in our department. And we run a whole bunch of different programs. So not just do we do these outreach lectures or pub talks. This is sometimes a pub talk. But we also have a lot of other programs. So we go into public schools, we give talks at libraries, we have a podcast. We have a lot of other things that are available. So if you guys are interested, if you ever have venues that you might find us to be useful to come to, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about how to do that. You can find more information at our website, which is u.osu.edu/APOP/, or you can find us on Facebook as well at the Ohio State APOP. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be super happy to hook you up or tell you about our programs. And thank you again.
Great, thanks so much, Lee. All right, so that's the APOP side of it. For those who aren't familiar with Slow Food Columbus, I just want to run through really quickly what it is that we focus on. In general, Slow Food Columbus is part of a larger movement, the Slow Food International Movement. We're a community chapter of the Slow Food USA. And we focus on three main pillars of good, clean, and fair. So for us, good is in reference to good quality, good taste, and food that is good for you, so healthy. Food that is clean, environmentally friendly. We say no to GMOs and that sort of thing. And then fair in terms of pricing for consumers, fair wages and conditions for the producers as well. So it's a system that hopefully is beneficial for all. This year, the Slow Food Columbus chapter is focusing on three different priorities. So the first is accessibility. Wanting to make sure that we're reaching out to as many different kinds of groups as possible, especially those who have not participated in the past. Visibility, so through programs such as this lecture series, but also on social media, making sure that people can recognize the snail, that we know that people are familiar with the work that we're doing. And then especially, and very timely, equity, inclusion, and justice, which is, again, the focus of our series for the semester. I do want to put a plug in for our upcoming series in addition to this one, which is Celebrate the Hands That Feed You. Usually we have Shake the Hand That Feeds You, which is our huge annual fundraising event. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've decided to not do that this year, and instead we're going to have a 6-week long celebration that is in line with our international conference, Terra Madre, which also is going to be taking place virtually. So feel free to join our listservs or to ask any questions if you're interested in that program. On another note, today is Give What You Can Day for Slow Food USA. So usually there's a set amount that people can pay to be part of the Slow Food USA community. Today is a day designated for whatever amount you're willing to give to support the movement. You can then have that membership for the entire year. So it's a fun opportunity to be part of the network if you're not already part of that as well. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, our focus, and as you may very well know, coming to join this lecture series, our focus is on equity, inclusion, and justice. And so what I thought I'd do is over the next, today and over the next few events, is kind of break down the manifesto. There are 24 points that Slow Food USA put together to say this is what we're committed to. And we as a community chapter are also invested in that mission as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm putting on the screen here 8 different points. It's reworded differently for the slow food movement in particular, but I do want to just kind of take some of that wording and write in a way that perhaps we can try and think about how we can apply this to our daily lives. So we're talking about creating a supportive environment for everyone that we work with, showing a commitment to honor diverse worldviews, life experiences, and cultures, challenging us to educate ourselves on EIJ-related topics, engaging leaders and community members, making sure that everyone's on the same page, especially within the Slow Food USA network. It's not enough that we have 1 or 2 leaders that are interested in EIJ. It's everyone, and it's a community effort. We also advocate for supporting food justice education and racial justice awareness. We need to develop collaborative and supportive relationships with people of color and organizations by people of color, beyond just race and ethnicity, looking at diversity in terms of age and occupation, gender, sexuality, all of this wide range of variation, trying to find meaningful partnerships, acting to challenge racism in various facets of your own life, as well as the different food systems and social systems that we're a part of, and then acknowledging the huge agricultural contributions made by various communities. And again, Slow Food USA rewords these differently in terms of the manifesto, but I think these first 8 are really tangible ways that we can get involved at a more personal level. And again, we'll go through the remaining manifesto in the next event and the one to come after. So without much further ado and without wanting to delay our speakers anymore, I'm going to first introduce Julialynne Walker. Her bio is here on the screen, and I'm going to have we'll have her talk for 15 minutes. Ron Jordan will then speak for 15, and then Whitney will speak for 15. In the remaining amount of time that we have left, we'll do a Q&A with our speakers. And so if you have any questions outright, just put those in the chat box. You should be able to navigate. It appears differently on different screens. Or you can just use the raise hand icon and then ask those questions live as well at the end of the session. So with that said, I will unmute Julialynne, and then I'll give you the warning as well as time approaches.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to the Slow Food Columbus chapter, as well as APOP. I'm very pleased to be part of the program this evening, and I have a few slides that I'd like to share with you on a topic that is very dear to my heart and that I have a lot to talk about, but I will keep it fairly short and focused. If I could have the slides, please. While he's doing that, let me just say briefly that we can go to the next one, that when we talk about seeking good, clean, and fair food, I'm a resident of the Near East Side of Columbus, Ohio. As such, I am rooted in a place that is exposed to numerous food injustices. It is a food desert, meaning that there isn't accessible, affordable, good, healthy food within 1 mile of our location. And we are located in a food swamp, meaning the food that is available is highly caloric. It is poor for a number of diets that with pre-existing conditions which people in the community suffer from, and it's fairly expensive when you consider the income that most people have. And so what I want to share with you is a model of a vertical integration model of civic agriculture that speaks to these injustices that are rooted in place and that speak to culture, class, and gender. Much of that I won't be able to get into, but hopefully you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about as we go along. And essentially our question was, do we wait for corporate America to decide to place a sufficient sized grocery store in our community, or do we do something for ourselves? And the bottom line was we decided to do something for ourselves. Next slide, please. And initially it involved a lot of talking, as I'm doing this evening, meeting with different groups, reaching across different communities, exploring with people possible collaborations, trying to find a way to identify the model that would best work with our community. I was asked to facilitate a 7-month agriculture farm development program under the Farm Services Agency. And at first I thought, you know, that's completely out of my wheelhouse. But based on my existing background, I sat down, looked at the process, and looked at the group that was to be served and said, at least we should try. And once I came through that, I realized the necessity of providing an educational model that would be accessible to as many people as possible so that they would begin to learn how to and enjoy growing food. And that's when we came up with, next slide please, the Bronzeville Agri Academy. And this is a online 10-week, that's correct, an online and on-site 10-week course that is literally open to anyone who has access to a cell phone or a computer. And what we wanted to do was develop an experiential course that took people through the process of planning for a garden, understanding certain agricultural practices, and then regardless of what space they had, using that space to develop something that would be useful for them. I was fortunate in having planned this course last year to be delivered at the Ohio State University Community Extension Service on Mount Vernon. And then when COVID-19 hit and the university was closed in March, we simply moved it online and I promoted it just as the Bronzeville Agri Academy. We are now in the second iteration of that course. And we've had participants from 70 to 7. And we have visited gardens, observing social distancing, of course. But we've had an opportunity for people to actually take what they're learning online and see how different people have been able to put it into practice. Next slide, please. One of the things that I've been consistent about is always having seeds. And it's like no matter where I go, everybody knows that somewhere I've got a packet of seeds, a box of seeds, something. And I was very fortunate in having being given the seeds by the Franklin Park Conservatory Growing to Green program. And they were very concerned because it was also a time when their programs were cut and they didn't have direct access to the community. So I was really fortunate in that people had immediate access to the resources they needed. And so by providing the seeds, people immediately began to see how they could actually be a part of a process, and that process would result in something that was good for them and that they would also enjoy. We also provided, and I like this picture, I've got seeds and seeds. This is a 7-year-old who participated in the session, who was very diligent, I must say, in alerting his mother as to when he needed to be on the computer for his class. But we also made arrangements with different organizations like the Greater Columbus Growing Coalition to get starter packs of small plants so that people also had access to the plants. And they were able to then move to the next step of putting something directly into the ground. Part of this program, the next step please, involved what we call the Bronzeville Urban Growers. And next slide please. This was a separate grant that was also written in 2019 to identify 14 families in the area. I'm sorry, please go back a slide. We wanted to identify 14 families within the Bronzeville area who would not only take the course, but actually be committed to growing a garden under a particular model. And what we found when we talked with people in the class, we recognized that people were very hesitant to dig up the ground. They were concerned about even getting dirty to a certain extent, or they weren't sure that their soil was good. And so we decided that what we would do is give each family 3 bins, and you see examples of these bins here. So if the family already had a area placed to garden, and you see on the left-hand side, this was a raised flower bed, and he simply placed his bins around it, and he was able to use the whole area. Or if they only had the bins, that was okay. And so we drilled holes in the bottom, we filled them halfway with sticks and leaves, we filled the rest of it with soil, and then we encouraged them to plant with their seeds and their starters. And we really had a tremendous success. Out of 14, we had 2 that really didn't complete their process, but at least we understood why. Next step, please. Next slide. But it was important to realize that once, so our first level in terms of our vertical integration model was education. How many people could we educate, providing a sound foundation in the basic tenets of growing? And then we understood that while that was good, and while out of that a random group of participants, we were able to identify these 14 families that were solid and really concentrated on growing, observing good practices, we also knew that to really be able to address the community's need, we would have to go to another step that was more collective. And this is the community gardens. And we've been involved with several community gardens in growing food, and we call it close to organic, because we understand that many could not actually follow purely organic principles, because to start with, many of them would have had to take out all the soil in their gardens and import tons of soil. They simply didn't have those kinds of resources. So we encourage them to be close to organic, observing good growing practices. And we worked with 6 community gardens within the area. Some were attached to churches, some were community-based and utilized families, some involved children, but we worked with them so that they had a full growing season, even under the restrictions of COVID-19 and the social distancing. But what it did was really begin to expand the knowledge base of the community and provide examples for many people within the community who otherwise didn't see the backyard gardens of our Bronzeville urban growers or bugs. Next slide, please. So we, in terms of the community gardens, our next slide. I will have it in. We also understood that it was while many of the community gardens were focused on, no, go back please. Many of the community gardens were focused on philanthropy. That is, there were individuals, say, connected to a church or a community group, and they grew food for enjoyment. They grew because they wanted to learn something. Some of them grew because they wanted to can. But almost without fail, and those of you who are growers in the audience will understand this, without fail, there was an excess of produce. And so one of the things that we did working with the community gardens was say, think about social entrepreneurship. Think about skill development. How can you use this produce to expand service to your community? Very often, the different groups were writing grants for small things and scrambling around for money at the last minute for different things. And we said, yes, you can write these grants. Yes, you can go to your church and get information or funds, but you should also have your own resources. And so we said, yes, give to the church, give to Mid-Ohio, give to a free giveaway, put it in the community, but also keep some of your produce and sell it. And when you sell it, do it in a deliberate way that helps you develop a business model that provides skills that you can use in any capacity. Next slide, please. And for me, my own particular garden is the Bethany Bronzeville Community Garden. It's attached to the only African American Presbyterian church in Columbus that is approximately 103 years old. And in many ways, it has been my healing space. And so it's important for us to understand that even before COVID-19, there was trauma in the community. That oppression breeds emotional conflict, and that it's important for there to be in the community places of solace, places where people can go to become whole again. And so it's really important for us to understand that the community gardens are not only a source of food, but they're a source of connection. They're a source of, as I said, solace. They're a source of relief. And so the Bethany Bronzeville Community Garden was established to provide food for the community lunch program that's just over 15 years, and that provides a free lunch to between 75 and 100 people each week. And so there are resources that come from the Mid-Ohio Food Bank and other sources, but it's also good for the chef and the team, the lunch team, to be able to plan with me what should be grown, when it's going to be harvest, and actually be able to use that fresh produce as part of the lunch program. It's also my workshop. So some of the ideas that I talk about with the participants in the Agri Academy or with the Bugs program, I work them out here with our team or with our space or with the seeds, just to see if it's actually, for instance, a profitable crop. Next one, please.
You're at the 2-minute mark, just so you know.
Okay. And then, so the last step, of course, is then, if I'm teaching people social entrepreneurship, there should be an outlet. The question at the beginning was, do we wait for corporate America to provide a grocery store, or do we grow our own? It was the same question around a farmer's market. Do we wait for someone to tell us it's okay to have a farmer's market, or do we develop our own? And we established the Bronzeville Growers Market under the sponsorship of the Maroon Arts Group at their impact space at 17th and Mount Vernon. Next slide, please. Bronzeville Growers Market has proven over the past 3 years to be a safe space for a neighborhood in transition. We have produce vendors, we have artisans who make various items, and we have information tables. Next slide, please. For issues that we think are relevant for the community. But all in all, it is an interactive space where people can come and not only obtain clean, good food at fair prices, but also interact with individuals that they otherwise wouldn't interact with. We also make sure that we have some informational tables at each market. Next one, please. And so I will conclude with 2 photographs of Bronzeville urban growers. And the gentleman on my left, he wasn't sure when to pick a radish. And you can see from his face, he was absolutely delighted because this was the first time he had ever in life actually pulled something out of the ground that he was able to eat. The group on the right is a group that is on a site visit. And this is literally an urban farm in the heart of the Near East Side that has everything from the crops to chickens and ducks and a pond with fish. And it's a completely integrated, self-sustained environment. So for us, equity around food justice is about how we as a community, remember the cultural roots of our community and remember the holistic, integrated way it used to function, and think about how we can transform it to function in that way again. I thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to any questions or comments that you may have later in the chat.
Thanks so much, Julialynne, for that wonderful presentation. I've got many questions, and I'm hoping that everyone else in the audience has questions as well. All right, so I put here on the bio of Ron on the screen. I'm gonna unmute him and get him all set up. All right. Ron, you good?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks for
Excellent.
having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna mute myself and then I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you to everybody that is here participating in this as well. And following following that presentation is going to be a little tough, but yeah, I'm gonna do my best here. Okay. So for me, guys, I'm gonna talk about a few of the pieces that Slow Food highlights, especially how we participate with some of our community partners in our partnership through Thornton Hospitality Group and Thompson Hospitality. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about the equity piece, right? And the equity piece being a different piece through entrepreneurship with what we do. So, I mean, you can read my bio, but I think the story I like to tell the most is in my 15 minutes is, you know, how my partnership through Thompson Hospitality, which is the largest minority-owned food service contract organization in the world, we've been able to affect a ton of change in a ton of different levels, from the largest Fortune 500 companies to including local spotlights and community gardens, just like the one we just saw in the previous presentation. So in our business, what we're able to do is take companies like a JP Morgan Chase or an American Express, Johnson & Johnson, or a larger university like a Texas A&M or Northwestern. And we're able to utilize our cafeteria and catering services within those organizations to highlight a lot of local talent. It's a way that we've internally been able to develop a way for us to give a stage to those who may or may not have it in their own entrepreneurial pursuits. When we were able to do this, it's actually led to a lot of people becoming getting in business for themselves, and put them in positions where now some have food trucks and some have some local restaurants. And if it wasn't for some of those minority spotlights that we do, depending on what market that we're in at the time, it would be really, really tough for them to get that opportunity. So for us, you know, my relationship with Thompson started a very short while ago. Their relationship was very different. They're actually the minority and diversity supplier for the largest national food service organization and international food service organization in Compass. Compass is made up of 10, 11 different companies. And the way it works is if a company requires a minority or diversity spend, they then bring in the partner. How it works for me is if we're in the Midwest region and there's an account that can be won by local and smaller MBE support, they bring in my organization in addition to Thompson, which is the NMSDC certified organization, and then also an MBE as well. And we come at it from multiple angles. And it ensures that we keep a lot of these companies honest to that number that they commit to. You know, a lot of organizations and a lot of people have either no knowledge of this or just a misconception in general, have a specific percentage of minority and diversity spend that they're allotted per year. A lot of these publicly traded companies, especially, you know, they highlight that in a lot of things that they put out there, but not a lot actually follow it. A lot of universities, a lot of state-sponsored, state-owned schools, those all have requirements of minority and diversity spend. And you know, I'm sure a lot of you know there's a wild underperformance in that portion of what they do, and a lot of it's just due to the lack of options that they truly have out there. But we've been able to take, you know, the option of the offering that we have today and utilize it to grow it to what it is in its current form. So Thompson, their partnership with Compass started in 1997 as they were a $10 million company at that time, and they've grown now to an $810 million organization and the 7th largest Black-owned business in the country. And under that, they have $2.5 billion of revenue under management today. And with that, they've been able to generate scholarship funds and again, put us in a position where we can be a little more philanthropic in certain areas and help other folks get to a point where now they can get the same stage as some of these larger companies like ours currently occupy. So that's the piece on how I think we help in that regard with some of the local spotlight things. But for myself, you know, just speaking to equity, I've always learned, my family's been an entrepreneurial family for a very long time. And for us, it's always been about how we continue to create some sort of legacy. I think with that comes a responsibility to educate those that don't live this life every day, right? I think the biggest disparity of wealth comes from the fact that there's a lack of resources for a lot of folks that are in certain situations or certain socioeconomic backgrounds. And what we like to do in our organization is try to give whatever resource or piece of knowledge that we can to some that have great ideas to spurn the growth of generational wealth in their family and within their organizations. And we've started that through our Jordan Family Scholarship that we do when we mentor student athletes. That's been something that has been huge for me. And it's allowed for me to help a lot of people get to a point of understanding betting on yourself and taking the risk. All of us bet on ourselves in some ways. Some people just like to mitigate their risk a little more than I do. I'm a heavy gambler when it comes to my own self-risk, and teaching that to many people that at the end of the day, if you have more confidence in yourself than you do everything or anybody else, that it can lead to different paths and different opportunities. It may not always lead to wealth, but it can also lead to access. It can lead to relationships, and it can lead to so many other things that can help in every vein of what this organization, Slow Food, is representing today. Then why not take the opportunity or the chance? For us, a lot of our closing pitch for a lot of these organizations is, if you're already going to bring in the food service, you might as well bring in the food service that's going to be the most responsible. And we like to claim to be the most responsible in terms of being one of the only minority companies that does it, and making sure that diversity and inclusion effort trickles all the way down to the lowest rung of the ladder and all the way up to our CEO. So for us, that's kind of a microcosm of what we do and how we do it. I normally do slides in some cases, but today I didn't want to do any slides. I wanted to be a little more informal, just because there's two very different perspectives between Whitney and Julialynne and myself, three total, I guess, perspectives. So I wanted just to leave it there and hopefully have a lot of questions as we get to the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your story, Ron. And yes, hopefully we'll have a lot of people again also having tons of questions for you and the rest of our speakers. And so with that then, we'll move on to Whitney, and we'll hear what she's got to say as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Slow Food Chapter and the APOP group, for having me. My name is Whitney Gherman. I'm actually a resident in the city of Delaware, and I live in a neighborhood that's considered a food desert. And for many years, I've been advocating for food justice and racial justice. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about that today and put some particular emphasis on how I show up doing this work in a white body, in ways that we can divest white supremacy from agriculture. The other thing I should note is I also am part of Ohio State University Extension. We are in all 88 counties, and our tradition has been around agriculture for many years, and more recently focusing on honoring the wisdom and experiences of African and Indigenous people in agriculture. So as much as this presentation is about agriculture, to me it's also about imagination. And the radical imagination in particular is about having the courage and intelligence to recognize that the world can and should be changed. And it's not only about dreaming of different futures, but thinking about how we can bring some of the ideas from the future to work on the present and to inspire new action and solidarity today. So in a few slides, I'll ask Mark to share, and I'll show pictures of the community garden that I've helped form in Marion, Ohio. And before there was a garden, it was just a vacant lot. It was, even before it was a vacant lot, it was a property that was dilapidated. And so it really, that piece of imagination is important in doing this work. The imagination also represents our capacity to imagine and make common causes with the experiences of other people. And so as an extension educator, I spent last summer, maybe non-traditionally, having office hours on porches and just sitting, getting to know people in the community. I've talked about my whiteness, but I'm also coming from someone that lives out of town, that grew up upper middle class, who had access to healthy food my whole life. And so building relationship, I often say, is the start to healing, and the start to healing from some of the trauma around land and agriculture. And so on these porch talks, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about the effects of climate change and the prison industrial complex and gender-based violence. But most notably, we talked about food apartheid and the devastating consequences of an unequal food system. Some of our most cherished sustainable farming practices have roots in African wisdom, yet discrimination against African American farmers have led to their decline. Black communities have suffered under white supremacy for decades, hundreds of years, as you all know. This has caused illnesses related to lack of access to healthy food. And Marion County, there's no special immunity. According to the USDA, 96% of farm producers in Marion are white. Residential segregation is still prominent, and Black children are 4 times more likely to experience poverty compared to their white peers. Black food and land sovereignty is the collective responsibility of all of us, not just African American people. And I'm really inspired by Leah Penniman's work, Soulfire Farms, in her book, Farming While Black. And she discusses the way that working class Black and white people have long understood that we're natural allies. And she offers strategies for white people in supporting Black farmers and Black-owned agriculture. Some of the recommendations she gives is enacting reparations, forming alliances, transforming organizations, calling in oppressors, and connecting with our own personal history. And that's what really helped inform my work in Marion County. So just for some clear context, not only do I live in a white body, I'm also a member of an institution that has stolen Native lands, historically barred African Americans from admission, and is employing working class people for less than a livable wage. And so there's a lot of cultural trauma just showing up right here. And so I really had to think, how am I going to do this? How, on a small scale, can we do truth and reconciliation? And for me, it begins with first letting go of innocence and just seeing those concepts of innocence and guilt and goodness for what they are. Often at a university, we do community engagement work, and we look for someone to deem us innocent so that we don't have to look further or understand ourselves. And on the other side of things, we try to avoid the guilt that we have, the historical trauma that we've caused. So we stretch truths and we obscure our intentions. And so we've been, trained as faculty members or educators to not admit that we don't know. And most of us are taught to sound certain in academia. We're the experts. We're taught to be confident and to state our opinions as if they were true. And so this really required a paradigm shift where instead of coming in as an expert with answers, I'm asking questions and spending time just listening, and not listening to determine whether we agree or not, but just listening to people that have different experiences than we do. And for many people in our community, innocence is a rarely awarded prize. And so as much as this also has to do with my own personal reflections, it's equally important for my organization. Fewer than 20% of nonprofit leaders are people of color. And prior to 2017, when I started with Marion County Extension, there was not one single person of color on our advisory board. There's a lot of inherent problems with this arrangement. Fortunately, now 20% of our board makes up people of color, and we've expanded program access by 1,000% since last year. This isn't just important for diversity, because diversity can happen and it can happen accidentally. Representation is important because it can be intentional. And without it, the white racial frame takes dominance. And I'm not suggesting that this is something conscious. Most likely it's subconscious, embedded from us when we're very young. But until we begin asking really difficult questions like, who defines reality, who benefits, who pays, who decides, we just perpetuate these narratives, which we want to move away from. And so with these questions in mind, to start a community garden, my most important aim was to support, particularly through gathering resources and information. And I want to make the distinction here between knowledge and information, because many people in the community, many of them migrated from the South with their grandparents had or their parents used to garden, and they have knowledge to contribute to the project. Information is nothing more than refined data, which just kind of translates these meanings and identify patterns in our social stories. And so we could provide that kind of information. We could provide information on gardening zones and soil health, and we could provide resources like seeds and small equipment. But really, to make this a diverse, well-rounded program, we wanted to honor agricultural experiences, cultural traditions, and diverse foodways. That of itself is a knowledge. So in 2019, I worked with Mays Community Temple to acquire some land from the city land bank. And there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages of doing this. The thing I recommend the most to people is it's really great if a city or county council person or if the county land bank wants to lease you the land, but land ownership is our long-term strategy because then we're not tied down to a landlord, and that's kind of taught us a lot about advantages and disadvantages, I'll just say. But like I said, we contributed starter plants and seeds and small equipment. And if you want to show the pictures, Mark, I'll kind of give you a better view of what this looked like in real life. And you can just flip through. This was the vacant parcel owned by the land bank. Go ahead, you can kind of just go through those quickly. You can see we have an annual planting day where folks come out, we plant in the garden. We provide dinner, and it's just a really nice event. Thank you. In addition to these planting days and harvesting time, nutrition education, things like that, we also knew that we needed additional training. And this was kind of twofold. We had big plans to offer more training this year, and COVID happened. So I'm really interested in talking more to Julialynne about her online academy. What we did to supplement was we partnered with Black farmers across Ohio, and we launched an online series that Black farmers talked about different topics related to working with land banks, plant medicine, microfarming, preparing local foods, etc. And this was purposeful. It wasn't only to be able to help local farmers understand these topics of agriculture, but we also knew that OSU Extension oftentimes presents only one image of agriculture and one image of a farmer, and we wanted to be able to diversify and change that. The second training we offered was on anti-Black racism and white supremacy. And we were invited by an African American Heritage Council to facilitate dialogue on this. And we really see that to do equity work and justice work in the food system, we had to put this at the forefront. And so I was really fortunate to build relationships with a community accountable scholar, Johnny Jackson, who facilitated this dialogue with me. And we continue to offer workshops in similar ways even today. This has resulted in, struggle, but also really big wins. The farm itself served culturally relevant food to over 100 families. We've won awards from the university, from the Ohio Food Policy Network, local awards. We've given national presentations, and we're developing fact sheets to replicate this model. So it's been exciting, but also I like to warn folks that danger lies in the face of the narrative that urban agriculture is a new idea. White liberals and academics, including myself, often approach this thinking it's something new and trendy, and we might leave behind the social, political, and the historical ties and influences. And this perspective really views takes away from the social justice work that we want to be doing. And when white-led urban agricultural projects receive the majority of grants and institutional funding, this replicates that model that I'm trying to give warning on of the narrative dominance and white land ownership. And so I just encourage folks to think critically about that and how you could defer and deter funding and awards to communities of color. I've also taken the position for myself that supporting Black Lives Matter or Black Land Matters is perceived as politically partisan. I think I just have to accept that perception while seeking to be inclusive and as welcoming as possible. You know, I'm an extension educator. My role is to educate, and education is not value neutral. Throughout history, we've seen education either uphold or disrupt the status quo, advance or regress justice. I want to be on the side of justice. I want to be on the side of upholding moral commitments that we have to one another. And so I just encourage everyone here to not also forget the trauma associated with land, but also the resiliency of the Black community and the agricultural wisdom that they provide to us. I'm going to wrap up my time. I just want to thank you so much for this opportunity to share. I will stick around with questions, but I really just thank you for having me on here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Whitney. And I, in the sake of justice, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name earlier. I didn't realize it was a hard G there. But again, thank you for your presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we should get back to the normal single screen or however people have it set up on their computers. And I'm going to unmute our speakers. And really, this is a time just for everyone to get a chance and ask our panelists any questions that they may have. You should be able to find somewhere on your Zoom panel the ability to raise your hand, or if you don't want to be on the screen in the recording, you can just certainly type your question out in the chat function as well. And I've got questions here just in case we don't have any immediately, but I'm going to do a quick scan and see if anyone has any questions at this point. I don't see any right now, so I guess I'll just I'll kick things off then. Actually, if I can start with Ron, I just want to get a sense if you can share how you got your start. I know that it seems like you're in a position now where you have the resources to be able to help other people, but how did you get to that point where you are where you are?
I was going to say, it wouldn't allow me to unmute myself for some reason. The question was, how did we get our start? Honestly, my family has been in entrepreneurship since the mid-late 60s. My grandfather was he was a residential home builder here in Columbus, Ohio. He grew up in American Addition, and he built homes for a very long time. You know, he did a great job building something that was centered around providing African Americans with an opportunity to be a homeowner that most weren't. Did a great job building that wealth, and then lost it all. So he learned a ton from that lesson, which can teach you a ton, especially from the next few generations, and then got into the restaurant business in 1997 with our first Popeyes franchise on Cleveland Avenue in Northern Lights. So we had that location 23 years until I went out and did my own thing for a long time. And when I got done with college, I was in finance for a little while, left finance, and then went to medical devices. I was a medical device rep for 6 years. So I made my money in medical devices and then took that money and invested it into what we were doing in the family. We expanded to our second location, end of 2015, opened early 16. And then from there, I used, the balance sheet that we possessed to go out and leverage that to buy 2 more locations in Michigan that included real estate. So once I got into real estate, then I had true control of my financial destiny. I took that real estate as well as the balance sheet of those current units, leveraged those to buy 1 more unit, build another unit, and sold off the real estate to pay off the debt that I used to open the units. And then once I did that, we held it for another couple of years, and I sold all the units for a 6.85 multiple of EBITDA, which was really, really high at the time, right before COVID hit. So our same-store sales growth in the fourth quarter last year for the chicken sandwich at Popeyes was huge. So I was able to capitalize on that short-term windfall and put myself in a position where now I'm in an appropriate capital stack. And it's that, and then it's also been the relationships that I've been able to garner over the years with folks like Warren Thompson at Thompson Hospitality and other folks that are here in town to get myself in a position where we've discovered the private debt market. But you know, it was not easy. I'll tell you, access to capital is the one thing I talk about probably more than anything. It's very tough, and it's very tough for minorities to access capital. So we do a lot of different types of education on the things that are out there for people. For me today, I also try to utilize, you know, the ability for some set-aside contracts that are here in the state of Ohio through the procurement website to capitalize on the lack of access to capital in certain veins as well. Because a lot of those will allow for you to put up 50%, 25%, or even sometimes no percent of what's required to win the contract, depending on the parameters that you meet. It's just people getting to understand how that system can work for you versus you working for the system.
Awesome, thank you. So it seems like you've been able to figure out how to get those barriers and go beyond them and have that support system all the way through to this point then.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'll transition that question then to Julialynne. Then with the work that you've been doing, what are those barriers? And do you know, I know that the market has been growing over the last, you said 3 years or so. What are the other barriers that you've been coming across as you've been doing the work that you've been doing?
All right, ours is slightly different. One, in terms of civic agriculture, and we're looking at urban spaces and the availability of land. And what we see is that whereas 10, 15 years ago, you pretty much had your choice. For instance, the vacant lots. Whitney talked about the garden where she grows was on an open area. It belonged to the land bank, and you could pretty much get those lots for next to nothing. Or if you worked on them for a while, then the city would give them to you. That's no longer the case. There's so much pressure because of gentrification, and that's the only way I can describe it, which is, you know, a change in population based on culture and class within a community where people are coming in and taking underfunded properties, putting monies in, sometimes to flip, sometimes to live in themselves, but they bring a different ethos to the community. And so it's becoming more and more difficult simply to get land. And as I mentioned, the 14 families that I work with all are working within their own property. The 6 community gardens that I work with, 3 of them are churches, and they have land that was belonged to the church. The property was torn down because many churches had properties attached where the minister lived. But as churches changed and the populations moved out, the ministers no longer wanted to live next door. And very often those properties became abandoned, and then that land is available. And so it's becoming more and more difficult for groups to have access to land within their own communities because there simply isn't land available. And so people have to work within the property that they own, and if they don't own it, it becomes even more difficult. One of the things that we are beginning to do only now, after we've been able to move this group from general education to actually working on the project to now thinking about selling and becoming an entrepreneur, is saying, all right, what is the next step in terms of buying land? And I mentioned that I facilitated the 7-month course under the Farm Services Agency. I noticed Rachel Tace is on, and she was part of that course as well. And one of the participants in that course, and that was 2018, one of the participants in that course just this year put money down on a multi-acre piece of property on which he can actually do proper farming. Although the federal definition is anyone who sells produce for $1,000 or more, we understand that really for farming to be sustainable, you have to have a pretty decent piece of land or a product that is of such high quality that it can be sold quite favorably in order for you to have the kind of funds to reinvest. So land is our first barrier, then education, or I'll even back up. I'll say land is the first barrier, and then attitudes. We still have issues around acceptance of agriculture as a permissible activity. Even though we do have within our cultural reference agriculture, and I know that many of the families who came up from the South during the Great Migration landed on the Near East side of Columbus, and almost everyone had some kind of growing activity on their property because that's what they brought with them from the South. But because people went into manufacturing and a higher education and different degrees, agriculture began to be denigrated as not an acceptable activity. And so there's still some residual bias against agriculture within the community that we have to work with. And then the rest in terms of access to resources, and that I don't see that as being an issue because there are a number of entities that provide assistance. We're working with the City of Columbus, the Farm Shares Program for crops for the market. I mentioned earlier the Franklin Park Conservatory Community Growing to Green. We're working with the Center for Nutrition Studies. We work with the Extension Services. There are a number of educators who provide assistance. People can take courses, get the knowledge. So, we have the ModCon, the former Habitat Library, and they provide access to tools for like $20 a year. So, access to tools and resources like that is really not a barrier. It's land and attitude, and so for me, that's what I would see as being issues.
And that's great. And I think it's also, it seems to me, at least from my perspective, that the resources aren't as much of a barrier because you yourself are your own resource, right? You know all these, you have these relationships that you've built over time, and so you're able to use that and share that with other people, which I think is amazing. To have that.
And that's the only way it's been able to work. And I think that's a key point, even in terms of the Slow Food Manifesto, is being collaborative, really understanding who your partners are, building these relationships, and understanding that it's not necessarily an easy process. And that's part of what, Whitney was saying, is that you do have to sit back and think about your own assumptions and biases and cultural conditioning, and understand how that may or may not be beneficial to this process that you're now engaged in.
Great. So Whitney, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. I see that there's a message from Noreen who was asking about a list of Black farmers, and you'll both communicate. I'm curious if you happen to know any off the top of your head. But then there was also a question from Rachel that was asking about if you've experienced any resistance or challenges to your social justice perspective from other staff within Extension or the university at large.
Yeah, to acknowledge some Black farmers in Ohio, besides the ones we have on the call. In addition to that, Walt Bonham is doing great work in Mansfield. Sophia Buggs is amazing in Youngstown, that's doing work around plant medicine. Brittany Jones in Toledo is incredible at working with land banks and land justice and distributing land. I work with Sean Jackson in Marion County, who helps me with the project here. Sadea Hamza in Cleveland is doing all this kind of backyard gardening and nutrition, and her kids are now selling homemade granola bars, and it's amazing. So yeah, I will be in touch with Noreen with those contacts, and I'm imagining that Brittany in Toledo might have some more that we can add to that list, because that was a project that she had mentioned to me some time ago. Rachel's question is a question I get at every presentation I give, is people have asked me how I haven't gotten fired. And I mean, that's a valid question, I suppose. But I think there's just, in general, a growing distrust of science in our country. We see this with climate change in the natural sciences and in social science. People deny the reality that racism is a crisis. And so, looking at the facts, it's indefutable. It's you can't argue with with what we see through data, and we're a scientific institution. And so, yes, I have faced resistance. I keep persisting. You know, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor has really shifted in kind of an interesting way, where now the university and others who may have wondered what I was doing with my time are seeing a little bit more support from them. And I hate that it resulted from a lynching, but I think that if we look at history, we're following in the same path we always have. So yeah, I have, but I don't know. I don't know what to say. Yes, but we got to keep doing this work.
Yeah, and I think persistence is definitely one of those key things that we all need to work on. There's a framework that we teach our introduction to cultural anthropology students in terms of belief, behavior, and structure. And when you have these different beliefs, the behaviors are all over the place. And it seems like with all the unfortunate news that is obviously plaguing the nation right now, our structures are starting to change, and we're seeing those beliefs and behaviors changing at the same time. So yes, definitely.
And I get scolded from saying this, but I'll say it anyways. You know, Ella Baker talked about her cause being humanity, and that's who I'm accountable to, is the community and people. And I'm so privileged to be part of an institution that allows me to receive a salary doing what I really love and advancing social justice. But yeah, the cause is humanity. And I also like that Ella Baker talks about friendship too. To the earlier point about relationships is, what does friendship activism look like, and how do we root this work in belonging? Because when we begin to ask the question, what do we owe to one another? And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the last books he wrote, asked questions about, you know, in times of crisis like COVID-19 and police brutality, are we going to choose chaos or community? And so I'm going to keep choosing community no matter what it takes.
All right.
We've got a question from Brian Landers. I'm trying to unmute you. There you are.
Hey everybody, I'm Brian. I'm an employee with the North Star Restaurant Group right now at one of their locations, and we have been in the news a little bit for our workplace actions about Black Lives Matter, about the COVID pandemic, and about the inadequate response on the part of our company and our managers. And I was hoping to get your perspective on what kind of questions you would ask from each of the panelists and how you would follow up and expect action out of somebody who is running your company. I feel like that's a little bit directed at you, Ron, because I feel like our managers and our owners, they've listened and they have cared. Honestly, I do believe that, but it hasn't translated into action. So I was thinking what kinds of things we could do to expect action instead of listening from our owners and from our managers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you a very frank answer, so hopefully I don't offend anybody by saying this, but I'm going to be honest. A lot of people in my business and your business, it's about lip service, and it's about riding the wave until we get through the 15 minutes of conversation in the media today. And the one thing I can tell you is I don't know the owners, I don't know the managers, but the one thing that you and your staff can do is to continue to control what you want to control. What I thought was cool is, you know, at least what I've heard, is that, you know, there's been some places in America now where staff has taken it upon themselves to move on, to walk out, you know, and to get to a point where you really get attention. You want to get my attention, reach in my pocket, right? That's the best way to absolutely get the on halls, but I also do a lot of meeting one-on-one with employees. I believe, you know, a lot of times the common misconception is that I'm in the restaurant business, I'm in the people business. If my people are unhappy, doesn't matter how well we do it all. It doesn't matter what food I serve, what what clean food, what non-clean food, it doesn't matter. If my people aren't happy and aren't willing to believe in what they're doing every day, and be that medium between ideas I come up with in a boardroom and things they serve line level, then it doesn't make a difference. So to me, listening is great, but action is better. And I think most of it has to come in a responsible conversation from you all, in forms of a meeting, and let them know. I mean, and when people realize that there's a lot more concern than they see today, then they'll understand, because the business of human capital is absolutely the toughest part of our business today. So when you all hold the cards and getting their attention and getting their understanding around these issues that they're not giving you enough action around, they should immediately, in my opinion, change. And if not, there's always another company you can come and work for, where we do address those things.
All right, thank you, Ron, for that. Are there any other questions as we're starting to wrap up? Let's see, so Brian does have a follow-up. Let me just unmute him again here.
I really appreciate the honesty, Ron, and thank you for saying that, like, it is the bottom line where they do listen. It seems a little bit in confrontation with what you said in the second half, where we have to sit down and have meetings or and listen to the people who are doing the things that we don't want. Right. So I'm wondering, Julialynne and Whitney, what kinds of phrases, like if you could put yourself in my shoes and think about working with somebody who might not recognize the gravity of the things we're talking about, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and creating a more equitable food structure, food system in our country, what kinds of things would you say, or what kinds of phrases would open up a conversation at least? Because when I sit down or when I talk to the people above me about this, it always seems like there's a friction or a confrontation. But what I want to do is break that down and have the sit downs that Ron is talking about. But it always feels like there's that backbone of confrontation, and I'm not sure what to ask or what context to bring it in that would reduce that friction and make it more open to having a friendly conversation.
I'll take a stab. And I'm not sure that you could avoid confrontation. And maybe Whitney has a different experience from her front porch talks, but because there is an element of self-interest that is always being threatened. You can minimize that sense of confrontation, but there's always an understanding that something that I value is being jeopardized. And so how can that be approached and be discussed in a way that allows me to accept that and not feel it so deeply that it acts as a barrier and stops me from moving on. I find sometimes if there are ways in which you can reframe the discussion so that the other person, stands, you walk in the shoes of the other people. If you frame the conversation in a way that allows them to understand the experience, or to try to understand the experience, that may help. But sometimes it really is about shock treatment, and it really is about being very graphic about being able to present what is happening. But also you may simply want to share an experience and then see how each one processes it. So whether it's watching the news, seeing something in the newspaper, and then having a discussion about your respective perspectives and why. And then finally, my experience is that this is not an overnight conversation. And if somebody comes and says, oh, thank you so much, I'm so glad we have this conversation because you've opened my eyes and I truly believe, don't trust them. To me, that makes no sense, because it is a process, and it is a process that takes time. It is a process in which people are fundamentally challenged, and then they will have to come back to see, what do I really believe, and how do I use that as a basis to move forward? So for me, it's about how much energy you want to put into the process, and then understand that it is a process over time. And I'll stop there.
Excellent. And I know I want to just be mindful of the time, but I do want to make sure that Whitney does have a chance to answer the question as well, which is a great one.
Yeah, what a great question. And I love both of your responses. I think the other piece that I would add is that for so long we've tried mental training and dialogue and education to solve some of these really contentious issues. And it's not working as well as we'd expect. But our bodies have their own form of knowledge. And what would this look like if we used our bodies more to build our stamina to talk about difficult issues? I do a workshop on using somatic awareness or body-based awareness for resiliency during difficult moments on racism, sexism, etc. And often I give analogies of, I tell about our brain, and oftentimes as white bodies, our bodies constrict when maybe even if we just see a Black body, but they definitely constrict when we talk about racism and police brutality. And our brains go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we have to be able to move people to the front of our brain because that's where our reasoning ability happens. Down here is our survival state. We're just trying to survive. And so giving people a sense of safety, and when people feel safe, they can move to the part of their brain that is more emotional. And in this state of our brain, we seek connection. And so this is why I talk about healing happening in relationship. And this is really in line with like the African tradition of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and really cultivating that sense of belonging. And then only with safety and connection can we access the top of our brain. And this is neuroscience. Our prefrontal cortex, where we can access reasoning abilities and have these difficult conversations. I'm happy to follow up. I'll put my contact information in the chat box if you want to learn more. But I think there's a lot of knowledge that we overlook from our bodies.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for responding to those questions. I'll just quickly throw in here that JP wanted to know where the name Bronzeville comes from. Julian, do you have a really quick 15, 30-second mention about what Bronzeville means or what that history is?
Yes, it was a name given to the area by the residents in the 1930s, and it really functioned as its own community, just like Bexley. It had a city council, it had a mayor, it was self-governing until it was incorporated until the rest of the Columbus in the late 40s. Awesome,
thanks so much for that. So I do just want to end with this final slide that I'm going to put here on the screen. Just have these two QR codes. So the first on the left is just a quick, relatively quick feedback form, just to get a sense of who's in the room and who's participated in tonight's session. So you can either just copy down the Google Forms link at the bottom there, or take your phone and scan that. And then the one on the right is to register for our next event, which is on inclusion in the food system on October 20th. And I can also go ahead and send that out to the folks who are in this list as well, to be able to fill that out. So again, I just want to thank everyone for their time and commitment to this cause and to the lecture series. Thank you especially to our speakers, to Whitney, Ron, and Julialynne. And I hope that y'all are not a stranger to APOP and Slow Food Columbus, and we look forward to continuing to work with you as well. So thank you everyone for participating. I'll be putting this video up in the next few days. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, or you want to share this with folks within your own networks, you are more than welcome to do so. All right, and with that, we'll stop the recording and have a good evening, everyone.